Okay, welcome to the first official testimony of the House Human Services Committee of the 2025 legislative session. So happy to see everyone here. This afternoon, we're taking up testimony on the General Assistance and Emergency Housing Program, specifically around the hotels and motels. What we're going to do first is to have an overview of the budget language that was in the 2025 budget as passed. And I've asked Ledge Council to give us a review of that language, and then we will have testimony from the Department for Children and Families. But first, we're going to, we have a lot of new faces, both in the committee and around the outside for people who aren't familiar with one another. We have a tradition of introducing ourselves, and so that everybody knows where everyone is coming from. And it's really helpful for people around the outside because we have so many new committee members to say what organization you're with if you're with an organization. Okay. Teresa Wood, I live in Waterbury, and I also serve Bolton, Buellscore, and Huntington. I'm going to change it up. Go right.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dan Noyes. I live in Woolkit, and I represent Woolkit, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Hi, good afternoon. Eric McGuire, representative for Rutland City. Started my second term.
Doug Bishop from Colchester's Chittenden 20 District.
Brenda Steady, Milton Westford, Newbie.
Hi, Todd Nielsen from Brandon. I represent Brandon and Forestdale, and this is my first time. Please bear with me.
My name is Zon Eastus. I'm Wyndham One, and that's Guilford and Vernon.
Hi, everybody. I am Jubilee McGill, and I represent Bridgeport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
And I'm Ray Garofano. I live in Essex, and I also represent Essex Junction.
Lori Morse, Committee Assistant.
Brenda Siegel, I'm the Executive Director of Mental Homelessness Vermont.
Amy Johnson, Vermont Departments.
Katie Regan, Public Action Schools. Ryan Graham, the Deputy Commissioner for Economic Services.
Oh, I love joint fist bumps.
Christopher Loris from the City of Rutland, one of the co-homeless response coordinators, along with Megan Novak from the City of Rutland.
Chris Winters, Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families.
Lily Sojourner, Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity within the Department for Children and Families.
Hi, Rick DeAngelis, formerly the Director of Good Samaritan Haven, now retired. Frank Knack with the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont.
Beverly Bogat with the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance. Nellie Marvel, Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs for the Department for Children and Families. And I'm Monica Diaz, Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs for Economic Services.
Thank you. It's wonderful to have a full house here this afternoon. And Katie, would you join us? And committee members, on your iPads, we will have it up on the screen as well, but on your iPads under our department, under our committee name, if you click on that and you click on Friday, January 10th, you'll see Commissioner Winters' presentation there. And Katie's going to have up on the screen for us the language from the appropriations bill. Yeah.
You're in son of it.
I know, you'll have to make more about this.
Afternoon, Katie McGlynn, Office of Legislative Counsel. It's so nice to see all the new members. You'll be seeing probably quite a lot of me. I apologize in advance. But I spend a lot of time in this committee, and I spend some time in healthcare down the hall. So you'll see myself and a colleague in this room. This afternoon, we're gonna talk about general assistance. Our focus is emergency housing, but since we have some new members, wanted to take the opportunity to talk about general assistance. So emergency housing falls under general assistance. Yeah.
Can I just interrupt just for a second?
Yeah.
This is something that we didn't cover, but please make sure anybody in the room and people around the table that your cell phones are on mute. So that there's no interruption when we're in the room. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So often we hear about the GA program and automatically we think of emergency housing, but I just sort of wanted to lay the framework that GA is bigger than emergency housing. Emergency housing is an aspect of the general assistance GA program. So this is just to show you in statute where the general assistance program lives and that it touches on aid for a number of different areas. So we have fuel assistance, weatherization, burial benefits for individuals who die indigent. So this covers a whole slew of various benefits and supports. What you will not see a lot of in this chapter is what we're here to talk about, which is emergency housing. Emergency housing is typically dealt with in the budget every year. It's typically in session law, meaning that every year the legislature creates a package to put in the budget about what the GA emergency housing program will look like for the upcoming year. So I'm going to stop sharing this and I'll take you to the budget language. There's Representative Donahue.
Yes, I was just going to say, we're being joined by Representative Donahue. Representative Donahue, why don't you do an introduction? We've just been around the room, but nobody has met you officially, so.
Representative Ann Donahue, from representing Northfield and Berlin. I'm from Northfield, and I was here at the start, but I used the public Zoom, so I heard you all, but you didn't see me.
Oh. Well, we're happy to see you.
I'll pull up this document. So what we're looking at now, soon, this is Act 113 from 2024. So this is the budget that passed last May and was took effect July 1 of last year. So this section, E321, is the general assistance emergency housing. So this is just focusing on the housing piece. And this is sort of the package that was put together for this particular fiscal year. Okay, so to start with, we have language that to the extent emergency housing is available and within the funds appropriated, the Commissioner of DCF is to ensure that emergency housing is provided in fiscal year 25 to households that attest to lack of a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence and have a member who. And then we go into a list of multiple categories of households that would qualify for general assistance emergency housing if they have a member in their households that meets one of these criteria. So first is they have a member who is 65 years of age or older. A member who has a disability that can be documented either by receipt of supplemental security income or Social Security disability insurance, or documented by a form developed by the department as a means of documenting a qualifying disability or health condition that requires the applicant's name, date of birth, Social Security, other identifying information, description of the applicant's disability or health condition, description of the risk posed to the applicant's health, safety, or welfare if temporary emergency housing is not authorized pursuant to this section, and a certification of a healthcare provider that includes the provider's credentials, credential number, address. So that's documentation for subdivision 2. And then we continue on to other members who may be part of a household's family. So if the household has a member who is a child 19 years of age or under, a member who is pregnant, a household member that has experienced the death of a spouse, domestic partner, or minor child that caused the household to lose its housing, has experienced a natural disaster, such as a flood, fire, or hurricane, is under a court-ordered eviction or constructive eviction due to circumstances over which the household has no control, or is experiencing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, hate violence, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against an individual or household member that caused the household to lose its housing. So again, that was the list of eligibility. If a household has a member that falls within those categories, then they fall into the eligibility for GA emergency housing. And then in subsection B, we get into what does this emergency housing actually look like? So first off, we have a sentence that emergency housing shall be provided in a community-based shelter whenever possible. If there is an inadequate community-based shelter space available within the Agency of Human Services district where the household presents itself, the household shall be provided emergency housing in a hotel or motel within the district, if available, until adequate community-based shelter space becomes available in the district. I might pause there and just say, as you probably inferred from this language, the state is broken up into various AHS districts. So if a family presents itself in District A and there's no shelter space in District A, they may be eligible for shelter in a hotel or motel, even if there happens to be shelter space available in AHS District B. This language goes on to say that there is a cap on the use of hotels or motels during certain periods of the fiscal year. So there's a cap of 1,100 rooms that are available through emergency housing between this term that already expired, September 15th through November 30th, and also between April 1st through June 30th. You'll notice right now we're not in one of those capped periods. That's due to the cold weather when the cap is lifted to make more rooms available to households that need housing.
Katie, just for people, it might be helpful to explain why we start September 15th as opposed to July 1st of the fiscal year, since this was an FY 25. Or I can ask the department to do that.
I'm trying to remember that this year there was a time period that needed to elapse to get a real handle on how many people were exiting and were going to need to stay.
But, all right, well, we'll ask. Yeah,
Okay.
there was a transitioning process out of the previous version of the program, essentially.
Okay. And then in subdivision B2, we have language that the maximum number of days an eligible household receives emergency housing in a hotel or motel under this section for the 12-month fiscal year period is not to exceed 80 days. However, and we haven't seen this yet, this cold weather period does not count towards the 80 days. Oh, is that the next sentence? So the department shall provide emergency winter housing, that's where we are now, to households meeting eligibility criteria in subsection A of this section between December 1st of last year and March 31st of this year. Emergency housing in a hotel or motel pursuant to this subdivision shall not count towards the maximum days of eligibility under the 12-month period. So the 80 days is for the window in the fall and the window in the spring. Notwithstanding any rule or law to the contrary, the department is to require all households applying for or receiving general assistance emergency housing to engage in their own search for and accept any available alternative housing placements. All applicants and eligible households shall regularly provide information to the department, not less frequently than monthly, about their efforts to secure an alternative housing placement. If the department determines that a household at the time of application or during the term of the household's authorization has not made efforts to secure an alternative housing placement or has access to an alternative housing placement, the department shall deny the application or terminate the authorization at the end of the current authorization period. And then we have a definition of alternative housing placement. Sorry. It may include shelter beds and pods, placements with family or friends, permanent housing solutions, including tiny homes, manufactured homes and apartments, residential treatment beds for physical health, long-term care, substance use or mental health, nursing home beds, and recovery homes. The emergency housing provided pursuant to the section is to replace two previously existing categories, catastrophic and non-catastrophic categories. Those are categories that had been in the emergency housing rule. So this version of GA does away with those two categories and treats everybody who falls under the eligibility criteria the same way. Emergency housing required pursuant to the section may be provided through approved community-based shelters, new unit generation, open units, licensed hotels or motels, or other appropriate shelter space. The department shall when available, prioritize emergency housing at a shelter placement other than a hotel or a motel. Case management services provided by case managers employed by or under contract with AHS or reimbursed through the agency funded grant shall include assisting clients with finding appropriate housing. Oh my gosh. Is this up on my, oh, sorry. Email just popped up. I'm glad it doesn't show yours. Can we just pause and get rid of this? That would have been terrible. Okay. And now we're just.
Oh, I just got a copy of it.
You just get a copy of it. Okay, so back to subsection E. So we were talking about case management. Subsection F. This has to do with rules. This directs the department to adopt emergency rules for the administration of this section. And then, well, the permanent rules are pending. So just to give you an update of where that is and why there were emergency rules, the rulemaking process can take 9 months to a year sometimes to have rules into place. And the start date for this version of emergency housing was July 1, which did not give 9 months to a year for permanent rules to take place. So this authorized the department to do a series of, I think, 90-day emergency rules. And now, so I think they've done 3 iterations of that. And now there is a permanent rule for this set of GA instructions that's pending before the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules right now.
And it's scheduled to take that up next Thursday.
Yeah. Okay. Subsection G has to do with reporting. So on the last day of each month, between July of last year and June of this coming year, the department or other relevant agency or department is to continue submitting reports that are similar to the reports required by the previous year's legislation. And those reports go to Joint Fiscal, House Human Services, Senate Committee on Health and Welfare. For new members, those reports are available on the General Assembly's website. If you go to the top bar, it says Find Reports, and you can search reports by name or just looking up the name of the department that's submitting them, but all of the monthly reports are located there. Additionally, the report is to include the department's monthly expenditure for emergency housing. In subsection H, for emergency housing that's provided in a hotel or motel, beginning this fiscal year and thereafter, the department is not to pay a hotel or motel establishment more than the hotel's lowest advertised room rate and not more than $80 a day per room to shelter a household experiencing homelessness. The department may shelter a household in more than one hotel or motel room, depending on the household size and composition. And then we have language in subsection I about what rules that are currently in place that DCF has to apply to this iteration of emergency housing. So we're asking them to look towards a certain section of their existing GA rule that they need to comply with the Departments of Health licensed lodging establishment rule, and also the Vermont Fire and Safety Building Code. So that would apply to the hotels and motels where people are being housed under emergency housing. In subsection J, the department may work with either a shelter provider or a community housing agency to enter into a full or partial facility lease or sales agreement with a hotel or motel provider. Any facility conversion under this section is to comply with the Office of Economic Opportunity under DCF's shelter standards. In subdivision 2, if the department determines that a contractual agreement with a licensed hotel or motel operator to secure emergency housing capacity is beneficial to improve quality, cleanliness, and access to services for those households, then the department shall be authorized to enter into the agreement in accordance with the per room rate identified in subsection H of this section, provided, however, that in no event shall such an agreement cause a household to become unhoused. The department may include provisions to address access to services or related needs within the contractual agreement. And then we have language about how much of the appropriation for this program can be spent on security costs. And in subsection L, there are some definitions for terms that we've used as we've walked through this section. So community-based shelter means a shelter that meets the Vermont Housing Opportunity Grant Program standards of provision of assistance. And households, this question comes up a lot, what constitutes a household? It means an individual and any dependents for whom the individual is legally responsible and who live in Vermont. Household includes individuals who reside together as one economic unit, including those who are married, parties to a civil union, or unmarried. So that is the section specifically on emergency housing. You also had language about emergency shelters. Would you like me to go through that as well? Okay. So the next section, E321.1, directs the department to continue to develop emergency shelters for the provision of lodging between December 1st and March 31st to households that don't meet the eligibility criteria for emergency housing. So that was the long list we just looked at. If there are folks that don't have a household member that meets one of those categories we looked at, then they would be eligible for an emergency shelter. Or they're otherwise in need of emergency shelter. Maybe they have used their 80 days and are not in the cold weather period. Appropriation for this, 10,000, million allocated from the general fund to expand shelter bed and permanent supportive housing is to be used by the department to first develop emergency shelters as required in subsection A of this section. Any allocated funds that are not needed for emergency shelters may be used to expand permanent shelter bed and permanent supportive housing capacity. And then we have language directing the department to submit to the Joint Fiscal Committee a plan for the development of these emergency shelters by September 1st, November 1st, and November 1st. The department is to submit progress reports to the Joint Fiscal Committee on the department's efforts to develop sufficient emergency shelter beds, including updates on work to provide overnight shelter and daytime solutions. And then again, we have a definition of emergency shelter. This is congregate, semi-congregate, or non-congregate facilities providing safe shelter where limited services shall be offered, including limited storage of possessions and personal hygiene facilities. And I won't go through this whole next section, but I'll just reference that there was a General Assistance Emergency Housing Task Force that was authorized in the budget. You have the chair of that, co-chair of that task force sitting in your committee. And that task force met over the summer, and I understand they have recommendations.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie.
You're welcome.
So now committee members, now is the time to ask for any clarification or questions that you might have of Katie of the language that she just went through. And I realize that was a lot to take in. That was a lot to try to kind of like wrap your heads around. And so if you don't have any questions, that's okay too. And one question I want to ask Katie is, so when one of the reasons we're taking testimony today is to evaluate and assess whether or not what we're going to be hearing from the department meets the legislative intent of that budget language. And can you tell us sort of like historically or what, how is legislative intent assessed? How do we determine whether their legislative intent is being met?
Legislative intent, the best way to determine if something meets legislative intent is sort of the plain language on the page of the bill. So we first look to the statutory language. If the language is non-existent, if there's no language to that point, or if it's ambiguous, typically you then look to the conversation, the discussion that happened in a committee, or the conversation and debate that happened on the floor. That is, of course, tricky because there are 180 members who are voting on a particular piece of legislation who might have different perspectives of what their intent is in adopting a particular set of language. So best is always the plain meaning of the words on the page.
I was one of the,
I'm sorry.
I thought you raised your
Thank
hand.
you. That's all right. Represent, go ahead.
I was the very first person to start housing the homeless in 2014 when the state approved CBOEO, meeting the criteria, and then they stuck me and Chris Daly in a room and said, make it work. So I actually negotiated with motels, and I probably anybody isn't as strong as I am, but I got some pretty good prices. If people aren't afraid to negotiate, I negotiated, especially during the winter when motels are struggling to pay their employees, like Anchorage Inn said, you pay for us to stay open all winter, the state. And what I want to know is the criteria changed where even if you're homeless and you're getting free hotel, you can still file for fuel assistance?
I
Is
don't have
that
an
true?
answer to that
Oh.
question. That's better for the
Okay.
department.
Well, I'm just thinking money wise, that's something we could cut because we're already paying for the heat. But at that time, they could file for fuel assistance and get the money even though they had no home. Okay.
Thank you. We'll think about that. Maybe that's a question, Representative, that you might be able to seek an answer to offline.
A big cost savings.
Offline. Yes, go ahead.
A question just to ensure I have an understanding of the statutory language. For those who are qualified, there was a list provided, and I'm sorry if this was in the language. If a member of the family qualifies, does the rest of the family qualify with them?
Yes.
I know there was language about dependents.
Yeah.
But
so if the way the list is structured is that we're talking about a household and not a family. So if a member of the household meets one of the criteria in that list, 1 through 8, then the whole household qualifies. Yep. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
the question.
Any other questions for Katie? Great, thanks, Katie, appreciate it. Okay, next we're going to be joined by Commissioner Winters. And as you heard, he's brought some staff with him, so feel free to pull up chairs as you would like. And committee members, there is a PowerPoint on our website if you want to go to the website, and I believe they'll probably be pulling it up as well. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Glad to be here. Glad to see all the new faces and the not so new faces. I won't say old.
Thank goodness.
For your first department to testify, I'm going to take that to mean we're your favorite.
sorry, go again.
Maybe not.
Well, think of it how you will.
So thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm really looking forward to clarifying some of the legislative intent, and we're happy to talk about that today. If I could, with the chair's permission, have a little bit of an opening statement to help folks kind of understand where we're coming from. I'm sorry, for the record, my name is Chris Winters. I'm the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families, and I'm joined today by Deputy Commissioner Miranda Gray for the Economic Services Division. We have a couple of other folks in the room. Maybe you'll hear from Director Lily Sojourner at some point on the shelter side of this equation as we grapple with the housing and homelessness crisis that we have in the state. I do want to start, and I think we should start every conversation about homelessness with an acknowledgement that most critically, we need more housing in the state, and you all know that. We have to address more housing units in order to address housing insecurity. And this GA program that we have is a safety net program. The shelter system that we have is also a safety net, and people get stuck in those systems for far too long because they don't have places to go after that, more permanent housing situations. And it's no secret that the states across the country that have some of the lowest vacancy rates and the highest cost of rent are the ones that experience the highest levels of homelessness as well. And in Vermont, we have this acute housing crisis with an estimated 25,000 units needed to get us to where we want to be as a state, where we need to be. So as we in DCF struggle to keep people safe and sheltered, I think at its root, we all have to be focused on what it takes to build more housing. And I know that's going to be a big focus this legislative session that you all will be working on. While our goal is to eliminate unsheltered homelessness, there's no state in the country that has achieved that goal. That said, Vermont's done a lot better than some other states in sheltering people and providing shelter despite some of the highest per capita homelessness rates in the country. We want to thank the legislature for your part in that, and our amazing community partners and advocates for doing the really tough work on the ground, helping to contribute to that safety net system. I also want to appreciate the really hardworking public servants that I work with who've dedicated their careers to helping folks in need under what have been incredibly challenging times. Things have changed a lot just in the last 5 years in terms of people experiencing homelessness, and that number has exploded. And the work that we've had to do has changed at the expense of other things that we're trying to do in the department. Our teams in the Agency of Human Services, and in particular our Economic Services Division and our Office of Economic Opportunity, have been asked to do more and more as we've seen this really unprecedented shift in need. So at AHS, at the Agency of Human Services, and please, if I use an acronym or jargon, please jump in. We're very jargon heavy at the Agency of Human Services, and please feel free to interrupt and ask what that stands for. At the Agency of Human Services, we're going to continue to do our best to implement this program, the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program, within the law. As that law changes, and it has changed many times, and with the available resources that we have to operate it as that safety net. I think, but I do think you all understand, we're not housers. We don't generate housing units. We are that safety net. And we'll continue to work hard on both near-term and medium-term measures like additional shelter capacity to help the Vermonters who are in need right now. So thanks for indulging me with that little introduction. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Gray, with the chair's permission, for a review of where we currently are with the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program. And I think some of the questions that you have are going to be addressed in these first few slides. We have about, this is a long slideshow, but we have about 12 slides that we'll speak to today. The rest are a background on DCF and the Agency of Human Services for those of you for you to kind of peruse at your own on your own time. And if you ever have any questions about the agency, about the department, you can feel free to reach out to me in between committee meetings.
And you'll get an opportunity to go through stuff like that during our budget discussions and testimony as well. And so just a quick check-in. Do you want questions as you go along, or would you prefer to kind of get through the information you have and then take questions at the end? That's up to you.
You can take them slide by slide.
Okay, slide by slide. Okay, great.
So this, for the record, good afternoon. Miranda Gray, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Economic Services Division. Thank you for having us in today. This is a quick snapshot of what Ledge Council just went over for you, but to put it visual. And then I also just wanted to highlight some key changes that have happened over the last couple of years. One, homelessness is not verified. Applicants attest to this. And so what that practically means is Economic Services used to say, like, where did you sleep last night? And then we would call that place and say, can Miranda stay there again? And if you could, then you weren't eligible for GA. But because of this language change to attest, we no longer do that. So that has increased who we're housing. Also, prior to Act 113, clients were not eligible if they caused their own loss of housing. So for example, if they could choose to extend a lease, or if they left someplace that they could have stayed, they wouldn't have been eligible for GA, and that has also changed. So as you might imagine, this is also increased who is eligible for the General Assistance Program. And I guess I will pause there because we said we would take questions slide by slide. And really the first column is just who is eligible, and also the rules of the 80-day limit, and then that the 80 days don't count between December 1st and March 31st. And then once again, they would count. And then when we had to implement a room cap, and when the room cap is lifted, and then it will go back into place this spring.
So I have a question, and the attestation language and the sort of change in procedure that you've had. I would imagine it would have taken a lot more staff time to verify those, what you just spoke of, Deputy Commissioner. So what has that enabled staff to free up their time to assist with other things, like maybe connecting people with resources, or how has that impacted staff?
So the sheer volume, in which I have in another slide, how many households that we've engaged with since July. Right, I don't know that it has impacted us. What I can say is it's impacting the number of rooms that we're using and those that are in it. So we have households that, and that we have a slide for this too, that we aren't able to offer a room to. They're eligible, but we don't have space in that.
So essentially, any time that might have been used, tracking down whether a person had a place to stay is now being utilized because there's an increase in the volume of people that applications that you're processing.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions on this? Yeah, Representative McGuire.
How's an application process? Do people walk into the local economic services building in their thing, or are they required to contact a number and speak to somebody in a call center?
Great question. And it's nuanced. So anyone can engage with us however they'd like. So if they'd like to go into one of our 12 district offices, they absolutely can. Our experts are on the phone. And so what we do is we would take somebody in. If they would like someone from economic services to assist them with connecting, then that is what we would do. But you would still be talking with one of those members who oversee our GA housing unit. Answer. So you're still going to end up calling someone, but if you needed assistance, you wanted help with that, someone in our economic services office would assist with that.
So there's two different levels to get in instead of it just being streamlined directly in regards for one interaction, and the individual has to actually have two interactions to get.
The interaction would be, would you like to come back to my office and we can call this phone number together? I mean, you're still going to have to see if you are eligible, if you meet one of these eligibility criteria.
Okay, and not to get just the last piece, what would then be the purpose of calling if you're already speaking to the person and they're a state employee, you're engaging in the office at face to face. You get where I'm kind of going with this? It seems like it's cumbersome.
Yes, and we have had, because we have had, as council mentioned, so many changes in this program, and we administer a number of other programs. This is carved out. So GA is handled by a unit. We do have some experts in the office that we try to keep updated on the changes, but this is a program, as you can see, like we had a July 1st implementation, a September 15th, a September 19th, and again, a December 1st, when we also need to be making sure that we are administering a SNAP program correctly, live heat, et cetera.
Absolutely. Great. Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
They no longer, when I did this for DCF, if after hour out, well, I refer to the CVEO, OEO, and during work hours. But after work hours, I had them call 211, and 211 could, well, if I hadn't used up all the hotels, which I usually did before I left, and stayed after a lot of times to make sure everybody had a place to sleep. I had them call 211, and 211 could call the hotels in my place. I was the only one when it started. And so they don't do that anymore? 211 can't house people in hotels after hours?
So they do.
Oh,
So
they do.
211 covers our after hours.
Who does it after hours now?
Yes, 4:31 until like 7:30 the next morning, and they do holidays and weekends.
And like you said, if there's no hotel, there's no hotel.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Let's move along. Thank you.
So I share these dates for a couple of reasons. One, to just show how much change that we've had, but also to highlight, while most people were starting their summer vacations, Economic Services was implementing a new program. And then Economic Services doesn't provide, we don't have weekend or evening shifts. This isn't something we do, but we did because our contractor that does normally cover weekends and evenings is not able to meet the demand. It was Economic Services and our other contractor who worked on a Sunday to be able to implement the 1,100 room cap. And I have to give my team a huge amount of accolades because we have been planning for this since May. How can we do this? How can we communicate? And then very quickly, Thursday, September 19th is when we started having people reach the 30 days. And I believe, Chair, this is what you were getting at, is what was going on the 15th and then what happened on the 19th. So I believe what we thought, because there was a lot of communication, I think starting here out of the State House with our assistants getting out to people, that when we were educating people that 80 days was going to happen, that we would have people that would leave. And so that we would naturally get down to this 1,100 room cap. What we found is we did not. Going into that Sunday, where the 1,100 room cap had to go into place, we were using 1,420 rooms. So we had to have a plan about how were we going to get to that 1,100 room cap. Then that Thursday, we did start having people reach their 80-day limit. However, we used to produce charts of this all fall of when did we see that people were going to be hitting their time. And it really was quite a long range because we have people that are coming and going. And I won't go into that too much right now because I go into a little bit more. And then the last critical date here, yet another Sunday, cold weather began. And so this is the Sunday after the long Thanksgiving weekend. It was our team and our contractor RDI were on the phone, and leading up to this date, we had offered extended evening hours to ensure that we were making ourselves available. We had reached out to community partners to say, if you think that you can get people here, we would be happy to come and do an outpost if you have a group that regularly comes, because we were pre-authorizing for folks to be able to be in the room on December 1st, knowing that the state is closed on Thanksgiving and then that Friday going into that weekend. So we were trying our best to get everybody that we could settled, understanding that the room cap would be up, and also those that had used their 80 days would then again become eligible.
Great. Let's move on to the next one.
And just say lessons learned from that. We want to watch very carefully this year that we don't put any law changes that happen on a Sunday.
Well, and I think we've got lots of lessons learned.
Yes, we do.
From that budget language. So, and we'll probably agree on some of the lessons and probably disagree on some of them. So, but looking at holiday weekends and Sundays and implementation dates is important too. Thank you.
So we also wanted to share, other work that we have been doing. And really, when I say we, it's really Director Sojourner and the Commissioner, as I don't necessarily do as much over the shelter capacity, but we have been putting out the notice of funding opportunities. So how can we continue to bolster what we already have and how can we add more new? We have been given $10 million of additional funding in the budget. And so we also had to prepare that notice of funding. We had a lot of outreach with several cities and towns and other community partners to assess what might be possible. We had to review all of those proposals, issue awards, and then work on the implementation. And then we also opened up or made the plan for and then opened up this later fall, the Williston Waterbury shelters to be able to help try to meet the need.
Do you have an update on any, because as we saw in the language, that $10 million was particularly appropriated for people who didn't meet the eligibility criteria that was in the budget bill. And so I'm not sure if actually you've increased shelter capacity for that ineligible group, because the two facilities actually are part of the eligible group. So can you describe any progress in meeting shelter capacity for the ineligible group?
Yeah, so there are so many different irons in the fire right now. And we could do, I think, an hour just on what shelter projects are happening, have happened. When we went into this in the summer with that 10 million, the legislature, I think, very wisely said additional shelter capacity or permanent supportive housing, because we were not optimistic that we get additional shelters. But we have, over a dozen projects that are happening, delayed for various reasons. Some of them have been implemented, and you're correct that many of them are focused on special populations more so than I think the ineligible adverse weather conditions population that we were most concerned about in looking at this legislation last year. Director Sojourner can speak more to some of this. I know she does have to leave early, and there is an additional slide or two on shelters a little bit later down.
So let me just interrupt for a minute, because we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about sort of shelters and capacity. I guess I'm most interested in, given the language that we just reviewed, has there been any success in shelter capacity for people who are ineligible?
Some.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah, for the record, Lily Soderman, Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and if folks look at slides 12 and 13, we can get to those later, it talks about some of the shelter capacity. I think one of the things that's slightly challenging as we move to implement this plan for the $10 million is that shelters often don't implement that same eligibility that the GA housing program does. And so especially in looking at the difference when you're just looking at singles or adults, you know, how someone may identify with having you know, the same shelter serving maybe someone who's over 65 as who's 30, or, you know, they're not necessarily carving out in the same way. So creating capacity there for those who aren't eligible, depending on who shows up, it could be used by someone who is eligible. I'm not sure if that's necessarily making sense, but it's not as if we have shelters that are saying we're only serving those who are under 60, or we're only serving folks. So that's a good dynamic. I will say that, just to clarify, the Waterbury and Wilson shelters are not utilizing the $10 million. So just to kind of clarify that point in terms of funding. And I would say, again, the majority of the ones that we did fund fall into that category where I think aside from one where they could be used by those who are eligible, or they could be used by those who aren't. So we funded extended seasonal capacity with 2 of our shelters. We funded shelter for individuals in Burlington, which is opening up later this month. So again, it's examples where, you know, the individual, maybe they're eligible as a GA vulnerable population, but maybe they're not. And so again, it becomes a little hard to put in place that barrier for non-family shelters.
I appreciate the answer. Not exactly sure, it's what I want to hear, but because I guess we'll look to this as we develop future language, I guess maybe is the way we'll approach this. Because, you know, the legislative language is very particular about what that was for, because when we looked at eligible population, there was a whole group of people who were previously, this is more educational, but there was a whole group of people who were previously eligible for GA emergency housing who, with this legislative language, were no longer eligible. So that was essentially, you know, adults under the age of 65 with no health conditions, essentially, and who were single mostly. So that group of people no longer were eligible. And so the $10 million was a recognition that, okay, well, we need to increase some capacity for them someplace. It's not going to be in the hotels. And how do we do that? So yes, we did allow some additional flexibility in that, but I think also is the intent that we would understand how that $10 million was used to actually increase the capacity for that group of people who are no longer eligible. So I think it's important for us to understand whether in fact that was done or not. And I'm not, I guess I'll have to say, Lily, I'm not really, I'm clear that you can't really tell me, but that there was increased capacity, but it may or may not be used by somebody who doesn't meet eligibility, or it could be somebody who does meet eligibility. And I guess I'm saying, I don't think that necessarily meets legislative intent.
I'll just clarify a little bit here. As soon as the legislature went home, Lily started working on the notice of funding opportunity and getting it out to community partners. And we did use the legislative language. We did say we wanted to focus on the population that's not going to be eligible during adverse weather this coming winter. We wanted to be up and running by December 1st. We had very kind of like, this is what we want. And then we had conversations. We had many, many conversations with towns and cities, especially the 5 where we see the most concentration of the hotels and experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And we had to deal with what applications we got. And there weren't a lot of applications for what we were looking for. So we've got a domestic violence shelter, we've got a youth shelter, you know, we've got family shelters, and then some that will cover the population that we were specifically targeting. But we took those as, this is an opportunity to create more shelter. Let's, you know, run with it. Let's take it. I think there's enough flexibility in the language. It didn't say we were absolutely had to use it just for this population. And some of that population is covered. So we could do another hour on all the different projects, but
We don't have time for that today, but, it's one-time money, so.
I can say that we're pleasantly surprised at how many communities, how many community partners agreed to kind of expand their operations, stretch some, see what they can do to lend a hand to the safety net and build more beds into the shelter system. And there's a future slide that shows just how many beds are coming online. It's slow. It's difficult. You have to have a willing community. You have to have a partner. You have to have the workforce. You have to have the town and city government behind you. All of those things. And then there's construction delays and costs and all those things that happen. So Lily's been really doing a wonderful job of trying to manage all that with her small team. And the community partners, I think, are trying really hard with these projects.
Thank you. Representative Garofano has a question.
Madam Chair, thank you for the information. I'm just curious, I totally understand what you're saying as far as the applications that you received didn't exactly match up with the legislative intent. But I'm just curious about the communication with legislation during that period, because I think given that we were very specific about what we wanted that 10 million to go to, like, I think for me, it would be helpful as, you know, chairs of the appropriate committees, knowing that you're not getting the response that we desired. So at least we would be in the know and like not show up in January. So I'm curious, what was the communication like with legislative, with appropriate committees during that time?
Thank you. You know, we, as Katie McClellan shared, we had reports due on September 1st and November 1st, and we shared updates on the projects that we were funding. Again, I think one of the projects, aside from one, I think, again, all of them are serving a population where they may be serving people who are not listed in that eligibility group. So just to kind of clarify that it really is potentially one. And I think in that one, you know, again, unfortunately, as the commissioner said, we're operating in an environment where the need is exceeding the demand both for motels and shelters. And so for one project, which is a domestic violence shelter project expansion in St. Albans, they were at capacity in their physical site and at capacity in their motel pool program. So it also, in some ways, relieves pressure on the motels in St. Albans to then maybe free up for other people who are even just eligible for the program. So I think that's the other dynamic. And I think what actually was also included in the language is like a recognition of how to support those who also just need access to shelter, because even the eligible population is having a hard time getting access to shelter, whether that's through a community-based shelter or through the motel program. And so those were the kind of things that we took into consideration. But I think that was the one program, and I believe we did identify it as a domestic violence shelter in the reports that we shared on the 1st and the 11th, but that seems like a long time ago. So I would have to check, and I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we move along? Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Would someone be able to turn the shade, just so it's a little, that one's fine, actually. I think it's the side window. Yeah, just turning that would help with viewing the screen. Very good. Perfect. Thank you.
It's lovely to have the sun, but it does, you know, provide some challenges. Thank you. Go ahead.
That was actually a nice segue into communication. So I encourage you, if you have a moment, we created a website to be able to put all of the communication, all of the data that we are collecting and putting out there for economic services on the GA program that we're running. The data is updated weekly. It includes all of the communication that we have put out this week and then since last March, because we have been communicating all the way back since last March, trying to ensure that people knew what was coming. And for us, a lot of the communication, it is printing off and putting letters under doors. It is also mailing. We get a lot of return mail because unfortunately people don't have a permanent address for letters to go to, but really trying. We have held community partner meetings. We have held meetings with the hotel and motel owners because that was also even feedback that we had received. We've had a lot of municipal conversations. So in addition to the shelters, also talking about the additional stress that might be coming from having a motel with a lot of individuals with high needs, and if there aren't the proper supports in place to support those individuals. So we've been trying to understand that more as well. A lot of training, and I guess that is pretty much what I wanted to cover there, with the exception of also we work with over 5,200 unique households since July. So just give you a sense of the sheer volume.
Thank you. And members, I would encourage you to go and mosey around that website. And if you look at that website and you go further down on it, you can see monthly legislative reports. I would encourage you to look at those. The Communications and Joint Fiscal Committee has sort of been keeping tabs on what's happening in the off session. Deputy Commissioner, I'm going to ask you if you could slip to slide 10 and talk about the prioritization process. The background stuff we'll get to again people can peruse that at their own leisure, but if we could take a look at my slide 10 is, oh no, I'm looking at January 10th. Oh no, it says slide 10. No, my slide 10 says administrative procedures for Act 113.
That is 11, but that's all right.
Oh, it's at the bottom. Okay, I was looking at the top. Here we go. Thank you. If you could review this. This is kind of some of the crux of some of our questions.
Yes, happy to. So this goes back to, as we were anticipating the 1,100 room cap, which was going into place on September 15th, and seeing that the households weren't declining, we didn't have people who had chosen to save some of their 80 days and go elsewhere. We knew that we were going to have more households than we did rooms. And so how were we going to navigate this? And that is how we came up with this administrative procedure. And so it is defined as like those that are more high risk. This procedure goes into place when we're at 90% of the hotel capacity. And so we are up under this procedure right now as well. As soon as we got into cold weather, essentially, I think it was December 2nd, maybe a day or two after that we had to put this in place. In September, it was that Thursday after that we had to put it in place, but then it only stayed up for about a week. So it differentiates its families again. So it has a child of 19 years of age or older, is pregnant, is experiencing domestic violence, 65 years of age or older, or is otherwise categorically eligible, and is a member who's 50 years of age or older.
What's categorically eligible mean?
So those as defined in the law. And so that we can do up to 28-day increments. What I will say is, although people think, oh, that's great, you can do 28-day increments, that is not what all hotels will accept. And if people have income, we also need to do shorter authorizations. We allow for those in this category to be able to call for their housing up to 10 days in advance. For all other eligible households, we will do a grant and up to 14-day increments. And they can only call us from 12 to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. And they have to call us on the day that their authorization. So imagine any hotel stay, right? You have a checkout time. The expectations that you are checking out at that time.
So we have a few questions. I'm going to start off with mine. Can you identify what the all other eligible populations were? It would be actually helpful on this slide. Yeah, these are the people, because there's eligible populations listed in the law, and on the left we see what the department has identified as high risk. I'll be honest, the legislature defined all eligible populations as being high risk. That's why they're defined as eligible. And so for the viewing public to know who are the other eligible populations would be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Someone who experiences the death of a spouse, domestic partner, or minor child, has experienced a natural disaster, is a court-ordered or constructive eviction, and then those that would have a disability that are under the age of 50.
Thank you. And we have some questions. Representative Gill.
Thank you, Chair. You spoke a bit about kind of that narrow window folks have to recertify for their hotel room. I believe it's one day, like the day of, from 12 to 4:30. 12 to 4:30. Are you tracking at all the folks who kind of fall out of the program because they're unable to make that work for their lives. I just think, I'm a parent and working and, having that very short window that's pretty inflexible seems like a huge barrier. So I'm wondering, I know it would be really hard to track, but like maybe counting your appeals and things like that. Do you have any sense of what that number looks like?
I don't have that number broken down in that way because I think the reality is that we have people that would be in that category who also just naturally leave. And although we've had many attempts, when we had the previous legislation, the June cohort legislation, right, we had to find out exit reasons. And so we can't determine always that it's why someone is leaving or is not with us anymore.
Representative Steady, you had a question?
I just don't understand, is a child 19 years of age or under? Is a child, a 19-year-old is an adult? I got confused about how that wording.
So it is a little bit confusing. That's essentially a family. And what we said that a family consists of even a child that is age 19. It used to be 6 and under, but we've changed that. I think it was the last.
So if a 19-year-old still lives home?
Right. They would be.
Why don't leave home at 18?
Right. Well, we have some children, I think that in school, they recognize that they are still able to be in school. So we tried to align with where there was best practice.
Oh, so the 19-year-old has to still be in school. It's not an adult 19-year-old.
They don't necessarily still have to be in school. I know, sorry, it's a little complex and I'm happy to get you more information if that's helpful.
Representative Bishop and then Representative Cole.
So a question on the previous slide about the communications plan and the municipal outreach or the municipal conversations. Is that proactive outreach from you folks, or is it just noting that conversations are coming in from the municipal and into your office?
It's both. There are certain communities, we're constantly engaged in those communities because we might have community partners there, other services there, shelter projects we're trying to move. But when it comes to hotel, motel specifically, like we're constantly talking to Brattleboro and to Rutland, Berlin, some different examples where community might have concerns about what they might say drain on services or an increase in crime. Not that that's totally related to the population in the hotel motel program, but they do reach out to us constantly, and we're always trying to reach out to them as well to make sure we understand the impact of sometimes bringing people to that community. Early on in the program, Rutland was where a lot of the hotel rooms were. That's just where we had capacity. So we did move people from one community to another. We're trying very hard not to do that anymore, trying to keep people as close to where they want to be with their connections are.
I'll share in this conversation and happily continue this conversation offline, but I'm coming from Colchester and we had meeting with our town representatitions.
It's another town we've been in touch with.
Yeah, our town representatives shortly just before the session started, and this was one of the top issues.
Yeah.
So.
I think Miranda had a very recent conversation.
Representative Cole was next.
Thank you. I just want to be sure I understand the very specific, and I know it is pretty short window that eligible applicants can, or any applicant can apply for renewal. So it's 10 days in advance at the end. So if you have a 28-day increment, it is on the 18th day or
right, that you would call to get your room.
Okay. So then you have from the 18th to the end of, well, I guess then of the 20 days that you said. And you'll be waiting. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I'm totally understanding which days people can call for.
So if let's just use an easy example. You're a family.
Yeah.
So 28 days and you've been given an authorization for 28 days. On day 18, right, you could call and you could get your next authorization in place. So you could secure your hotel room in advance.
And since
only if you're a high-risk individual, I see that's on the left side.
Right. And so since months often go longer than 28 days, except for February. So the last 2 days of that month or last 3 days or whatever, that would be, you would need to apply ahead of that cycle because you wouldn't be covered for the full month necessarily.
No, I'm sorry. No, that's all right. I can tell I'm not explaining it in a way that's helpful. So I'm trying to, or did you just?
The 28 days is a rolling 28
Yeah,
days.
it's not by calendar.
It's not by calendar month.
Okay.
And if they stay more than 28 days, they can fight for residency and they can have to go through the eviction process. My nephew owns Cadillac in St. Albans, so.
So does that help? Essentially what this policy did was to try to eliminate that. Like you don't have to wait until your 28th day to contact if you're one of the high risk households. I think what the chair is getting at is if you are not, and what Rep. McGill is saying is if you're in this other category, they're saying you can call on the day that your authorization is up and between noon and 4:30.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So can you explain what, so I guess I'll ask now, what is the capacity? What is the capacity that we have, since we don't have a limit, but I realize that there is only a certain number of hotels that will work with you and only a certain number of hotel rooms that you have available. What is our capacity right now?
So, this slide, which I just can pop back briefly, essentially tells you what we have for capacity. What this doesn't include is we always have some households who are self-paying. And so they have income. It might be from employment, it might be from social security. So it's about a little over 1,400 rooms is what we have available to us right now.
Okay. And so what you're saying with your procedure is when you reach 90%, which during cold weather is pretty much going to be every day, then you implement that procedure that we were just reviewing. And is that the same kind of procedure that you implemented prior in cold weather? So the provisions of this cold weather, other than the eligible population, is pretty much similar to what cold weather has been. There's changes in dates. You know, I previously started in November, and but other than the category of people who are not eligible anymore, the provisions have been pretty much the same. Did you have this same kind of procedure under previous cold weather provisions?
I did not, but I will say, and I know you wanted me to skip here, but what I want to share is we, through every cold weather season, but then also in summer, this summer, we have households that were never able to offer a room. And so a part of this procedure is to try to give some people some opportunity to actually be able to access a room. This is a rather large number, right? And this is just in December.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask a question. I'll get to you in a minute, Representative Steady. Let me ask a question. So is it possible for a currently housed individual who qualifies as being homeless to lose their shelter in a hotel in favor of a person who meets a priority category?
Only if on the day that you were supposed to check out, right? So that naturally happens when all of us go to hotels, you have a checkout time. So if we know that you were checking out and there's a household to check in, that would be priority.
And given the fact that we have 466 households who are not housed, that seems like a pretty likely occurrence.
It is, but I can tell you we have non-priority households being housed right now.
Non-priority households, yes, right. Well, their time hasn't ended yet. Representative Steady.
Oh, is there any contract or anything where there's consequences?
So there's
like if you house somebody that destroys a motel room, do they automatically get renewed or is there any consequences?
It is up to the hotel to notify economic services that there has been something that they don't like and they can ask them to leave. And depending on, there is language in the law about, depending on what it is that you do, a period of ineligibility. So you could not be eligible for GA for 30 days.
There is now?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
So okay, I'm going to ask another question. Does anybody else, sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions. I want to make sure that people, Dan, did you have your hand up at all or previously?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I just have a question around the number of individuals who are over the age of 65, and just wondering about access to case management for them to move them into a more stable housing and to provide them with with services, are you able to find and provide case management for them to get services outside of GA housing so that maybe they're into a more permanent housing location?
So people that are eligible for GA are connected to coordinated entry, and it is through coordinated entry that if you weren't connected to a case manager, that's how you would be connected to case management. Economic Services doesn't provide, with the exception of for households who are eligible for Reach Up, because that is another program within our division. We provide that case management. Otherwise, this case management comes through other entities. What I can say is that we have been we haven't been trying. We have been working really closely with our other departments to identify, like who is falling through the cracks. How can we pull together, if it is Dale, if it's DMH, DOC, it isn't very much engaged, or I feel like DOC has kind of figured out how to help support their individuals and other mechanisms. So it would be there that we would identify, like, okay, does this person have a case manager? Do they just need help convening a team meeting, or no, they didn't have any connections?
So how about outside of state government? Do you work with the area agencies on aging to?
So Dale, the Department of Aging and Independent Living does, and that would be, right, like, so I would connect with my counterpart in Dale, they would bring in who they work with.
And so that communication's happening and working, and those individuals are.
I will say some, and it depends on the program, right? Some case management is optional. People don't have to accept that case management per se. Or in some areas of the state, you're on a wait list even to get into coordinated entry, and we don't penalize you for the system not being able to get you in. We will house you, and it is your goals to get into the coordinated entry system.
So just a little bit of clarifying there. Did I hear correctly that you don't have to participate in case management?
There are certain programs, right, where you wouldn't need to engage if that wasn't something that you wanted to do. What you do have to do for GA is if you have another option presented to you, you have to take that. So if we have a shelter bed to offer you, you have to take that shelter bed.
Thank you so much.
In the language that Ledge Council reviewed with us, as well as you reviewed to us, we saw the list of eligible populations, and what I'm trying to understand is I didn't see anything within that language that authorized the distinction between one group of eligible population and another group of eligible population. And that seems to be something that the department has instituted on its own, and is also contrary to previous history with this. I'm speaking particularly of the cold weather months. And I want to make sure that I'm understanding what I heard as testimony, which I believe is what you said, Deputy Commissioner, that you wanted the opportunity for some people who are currently unhoused to be able to access shelter. Is there, is that accurate? And two, are there any other, reasons about this? Because while I understand when there's an 1,100 room in 80 days and, needing to have to move from, 14 or 1,500 rooms down to 1,100, and you needed that, some process to determine who needed to leave, essentially. I'm not as understanding of this process during cold weather months, to be perfectly honest. I don't understand how that fits with the legislative language.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to acknowledge what you said, that every person who's eligible for this program is in a vulnerable situation, so-called vulnerable individual, vulnerable population that you've already defined. I think it was first and foremost going from 1,400, 1,500 rooms down to 1,100. We're thinking, how are we possibly going to choose? How are we going to do this? And I do recall last year, wondering that aloud to a couple of different committees, saying, can we, what are we supposed to do when we get to that point? And I don't think it was ever addressed. And so I think we were operating in good faith, thinking, how can we cover those who are at the most risk And we consulted with the Department of Health, we're looking at different populations, and we landed on, for the 1,100 reduction on these populations. And we were still kind of debating, should we be doing this for adverse weather as well? And we concluded that we should prioritize children, that we should prioritize people over 65, that we should prioritize people with disabilities over the age of 50, understanding that's a terrible choice to make. No one wants to make that choice. It's a blunt instrument because it's not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes in that. We're going to leave people under 50 who are highly vulnerable off the high priority list. I'll say that's true. But we had to have something that was easy to implement, that we could not easy to implement, but clearly implement, that we could train our staff on, so that we could create that opportunity, as the deputy commissioner said, for families, for people over 65, for people over 50 with disabilities to have access to a room rather than first come, first serve for the entire population. We prioritized a certain number of what we feel are higher risk households. I'm glad we're having this conversation now and going forward. We want to talk about how we more accurately parse that population when we have not an unlimited resource. We have more need than we have rooms available. How do we make these choices? These are some of the toughest conversations that that a state employee has to make. I'm sure Representative Steady remembers how hard it is to tell somebody, sorry, there's no hotel room available for you.
I stayed till I got them. I was one of them.
It was a little different time in 2014, I'll say. It was a few hundred, not a few thousand.
Yeah, and we only had like 1,500 back then.
But in any case, this is how we tried to make that very difficult decision. But again, we're really happy to have that conversation so we can have some clarity on it moving forward and perhaps try a different plan.
Okay. I have a question that I'm understanding what you're saying about the prioritization within eligible populations. I am. I think that the thing that I am having the most difficulty with is because we have all eligible populations. They're all of equal priority. I remember having this discussion with, you and members of your staff about, well, is there one population, how is this list? Is there a prioritization within this list? And legislators clearly said, no, there's not. These are all eligible population. And I recognize also that there's a limited number of rooms and you have more people than not. What I'm having the most difficulty with is taking one person who is in the eligible population and at some point in time saying, you, I'm sorry, are no longer going to be able to have shelter and somebody else is going to have shelter in your place. Now, I really don't think that the law envisioned that. And yet that's what this procedure, this administrative procedure actually does envision. And so I'm just laying that out there as that's a problem. And I think we all recognize going into this that because we have a lot of history about this, that we have not been able to meet the entire demand, 100% of the demand. I remember last year getting almost daily updates about, the number of people who we were not able to shelter. So I'm just putting that out there as a concern. I'm putting that out there as we come up towards permanent rule making and, feedback that I'm required to give to LCAR. So I just don't want things to come as a surprise at all in that process. And so that's.
I could just comment on that, Madam Chair. I think something for us all to think about is if you put someone into hotel room for the winter and you say no reauthorization, no prioritization, you're there for the 4 months. You've got a long line of people who will never get access to a hotel room. So again, an impossible choice of you give the room to someone for 4 months or do you give it to them for 2 months and give an opportunity for someone else that we think is in a higher risk population, an opportunity for the other 2 months?
I get your argument. I mean, I get your rationale. So I'm gonna check in with you to see, are there other key slides? I told committee on their first week, they could get out by 2:30. Are there other?
It's talking about, I want to hang it all week.
Are there other key elements of your slides, recognizing that we're gonna have many opportunities to talk about some of this background information, and you know, for the listening public, this will be one of the things that we tackle before crossover this year. We will have a GA bill. We will have a shelter bill. I'm not going to call it a GA bill. We will have a shelter bill because that's, you know, I think what we'll be focusing on. And we look forward to working with you and with other people around the room to develop something that makes sense for Vermonters, I hope. But just checking in to see if there's other slides that you want to cover today.
I think we hit everything we needed to hit today.
All right.
A lot of great questions. Thanks.
Can I ask one more real quick?
Sure, Representative.
We still are, after hours, there's no way of checking eligibility. There's no way of checking eligibility. How is that handled now?
Be provisionally housed to your house for the night and then
So
you have
it's
to
still the
contact-
same if it's 32 degrees, anybody from, and it's like Boston, New York City can come and say, I'm stuck in Vermont. Can I get a motel room? I don't have any money. It's still the same. Okay, I was just curious how that worked. Okay.
No, there's no degrees anymore. Representative Steady. There's no degrees.
Oh, it was 32 degrees and under. And
yes.
every day they gave me a weather report.
Yes. We're just going to presume in Vermont in the winter it's cold.
That is cool. Okay.
That's the presumption.
That's a new.
Yes. So we have streamlined some things, let's just say. I want to say thank you very much to the witnesses and appreciate you being here today. Appreciate the background information. We have lots of stuff to look at. And as I said, we'll be talking a lot. Representative McGill?
Yeah, just.
I mean, McGill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes,
I
yes,
just want to make a quick statement and a quick comment. I just want to express my gratitude and appreciation to you, Commissioner Winters, and your team for the collaboration and communication in working with Rutland City as we are doing the best we can to establish different levels of sheltering for the population being served down there. So thank you very much for your communication, collaboration, and support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McGuire.
Thank you. Spell it.
Yeah. All righty.
Sometimes he calls me McGee.
I know. Representative Donahue, I'm just checking in with you since, do you have, okay, are you all set?
I am, thank you.
Okay, stay on though, as we close out, because I have a couple little housekeeping things. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the sunshine. Appreciate it. Thank you, Katie, for all your help. Appreciate it. Okay, so this is just a couple of housekeeping things. We neglected to officially nominate and reach consensus on a clerk for the committee. And Representative Noyes has been our clerk for the last 2 years. He's very good at it. And just an FYI for what the clerk does, when we take an official vote on a bill, the clerk calls the roll and the clerk works with the member who is reporting the bill as well as our committee assistant to make sure all the procedures are followed about getting it on the calendar and all of that kind of stuff. So Dan has indicated a willingness to continue as clerk. Are people all okay with that?
Yes.
Anybody have a burning desire to do it themselves?
I'm clerk of the select board. I'm vice chair of the civil board. I don't need any more.
Okay, awesome. All right, Ann had enough and not head, so.
Great job.
Everybody.
Great job.
All right, that's awesome.
It's actually a lot of work being a clerk.
Okay, so the other thing I like to do at the end of Friday is just to do a quick review of what next week's agenda is going to be like. We are still working on Tuesday unless Lori has any news for me on 1 o'clock.
Send something out to them.
Okay, so we are looking each week at 1 o'clock on Tuesdays to do our oversight and accountability session. I have a whole list of things about previous bills and things that we've done. This was an example of what our oversight and accountability sessions would be like. We reviewed the previous language. We asked questions about implementation. We'll make some it's about essentially understanding that the role of the legislature is not just to pass bills, okay? The role of the legislature is to review whether those laws are being implemented and to what extent is legislative intent being followed. So this is an opportunity for us to do that. So we will do that regularly on Tuesdays at 1. However, we're still trying to schedule next Tuesday. Representative Garofano and I have training for the rest of the day on Tuesday. So that would be our only agenda item if we can get that. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, we are going to have a joint testimony with the House Judiciary Committee. And we are going to be having testimony. Really, it's going to give us an overview and background information on juveniles involved with the justice system. And how those individuals are handled both on the judiciary side of things, but then also on the DCF side of things. So the judiciary piece is how they essentially come into the state's custody at some point in time. And then once that happens, we in our committee have responsibility for providing resources and programming for them. And so we decided that we would meet jointly because we thought it would be helpful for the Judiciary Committee to hear really about what DCF is doing, what it can do, what it can't do, what it might be able to do in the future, and also helpful for us to understand what's the process by which juveniles are and young adults enter people who have been involved with the law and justice system, how they might enter DCF services in that way. So we'll be having background. There's a lot of witnesses to cover in that area. So we're going to be hearing from judiciary, all the way through advocates, all the way through legal representation, through DCF, through a lot of different witnesses have a lot of things to say about this. So don't worry if it all seems like a lot of information that has your mind really boggled. That's okay. It is mostly a learning session, okay? It is going to be across the way in the Pavilion Building. Thank you. I got the name of the building for a minute. You will need to have your key card on you to get into that building. So have your key card with you, and
it's over there.
It's the Pavilion Building that's across across the parking lot.
With our feet.
Our feet.
That's right.
Because I'm lost puppy.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I also do want to mention, if anyone has any mobility issues for any reason.
I have asthma. I can't walk.
This is why I'm saying it out loud. Anybody, we can contact the, I was going to say the sheriff. We can contact the Sergeant at Arms office, and they do have a little four-wheeler vehicle that can take you from the outside of the Lincoln Hall down to that building and then come pick you up.
Walk.
Yeah, it's a walk outside. It's not far, but there is an incline. So, if you have asthma, or if you have any other kind of mobility issues, it might be something, or crutches, that's right. Anne might not want to do that, but, so please just let Lori know so she can assist you with that accessibility, okay? Just let her know in advance. Send her email. Yeah, she said send her an email.
What? Have you sent?
Al Morse.
Yeah.
Everybody in the legislature is.
I did, so I'll have it.
Okay. And we're still working on Friday. So that's what Wednesday and Thursday is going to look like. And we're still working on Friday. So every day will begin at 1 in the afternoon.
Yes, I just want to make sure because I don't want to.
Absolutely. That's okay. Just make sure to,
every day
call up the agenda. And you'll see that it's right there.
Okay.
We go to the House floor at 3:30 or 3. We go to that
On Wednesday and Thursday.
on Wednesday and Thursday, right? On Wednesday and Thursday, we go to the House floor at 3. There won't be a lot happening on the House floor other than announcements, bill introductions, and all of that kind of stuff. Depending upon what we have scheduled, we may or may not come back to committee that day. So again, just watch the agenda, okay? So have a great weekend, everybody, and first good week. Thank you. All righty.
Hey, yeah, have a good weekend.
Bye, Ann. Yes, we can go off.
So what did you do with your trivias?
Oh, Ann, wait, don't go yet.
Oh.